I forgot to water my garden for 2 weeks and half my plants gave up on life. If that sounds like you, here are the 5 indestructible plants that actually prefer to be left alone.
A single black-eyed Susan from a nursery will usually cost between $10 and $20, but that same plant naturally produces over 1,000 seeds every season, material you can harvest yourself for free. We are going to walk through a 2-step mechanical shaker method designed to strip away the dead waste, leaving behind a highly concentrated yield of live seed. You don't need specialized equipment for this. Grab a paper bag, a kitchen strainer, an empty plastic container, and a few heavy metal nuts and bolts from your toolbox. Mastering this extraction process allows that one-time purchase to provide enough seed to fill your entire landscape with new plants, season after season. For this process, step 1 is sourcing your plants. If you are harvesting from a meadow or an established garden, look for true native species or verifiable cultivars. Be careful with strangely colored varieties in a neighbor's yard. These are often complex hybrids, meaning any seeds they produce may be sterile or genetically unstable. This diagram compares a yellow active bloom on the left with our target state on the right. You need to wait about a month after the flowers fade until the petals fall off and the dark central cone is bone dry. Once you find a completely dry cone, take your shears and snip the stem right below the base of the seed head. Drop those clipped heads into an open paper bag and let them sit in a cool, dry room for at least 1 week. Black-eyed Susans grip their tiny seeds tightly. Removing every last drop of moisture makes the plant tissue brittle, allowing the seeds to detach more easily during mechanical agitation. For phase 1, drop your dried seed heads into the plastic container. Fill it no more than halfway so the heads have space to crash into the walls. Seal the lid tightly and give the plastic container a vigorous, continuous shake for 10 to 20 seconds. Open the container and dump the contents through a kitchen strainer directly onto a high-contrast white paper plate. This chart shows the composition of the pile you've created. At this stage, the material is dominated by about 80% fuzzy chaff, with only a small portion of live seed. If you are scattering material over a wild meadow, this rough mixture works fine. But if you are starting seeds in trays, this volume of waste makes it difficult to gauge your planting density, which often results in patchy, uneven growth. To isolate the seeds, we move to phase 2. Take those partially stripped seed heads out of the strainer and put them back into the empty plastic container. Now introduce your hardware, the nuts, the heavy bolts, or large metal coins, directly into the container with the heads. Seeds are deeply embedded in the cone. The hardware provides blunt force to shatter physical bonds a standard shake can't break. You must overcome the plant's seed retention defenses. Agitate vigorously for 30 seconds to ensure the seeds are forced out. Open the lid and strain this second mixture over a brand new, clean white surface. Look at the difference in the final output. You are left with hard, clean seeds that are free of fuzzy plant waste. Introducing mechanical force is the only reliable way to separate the seed from the cone without having to pluck them out by hand. Fold your paper plate to create a funnel and slide your pure seeds into a storage envelope or a glass jar. Avoid sealing seeds in an airtight plastic container if they aren't 100% dry. Any trapped moisture will breed mold and rot your entire harvest. For the best results next spring, store your seeds in a location that is consistently cool, dark, and dry. When planting season arrives, wait until the ambient soil temperature reaches 70 degrees before putting them into the ground.
Sedum, better known as Stonecrop, is an herbaceous succulent capable of withstanding temperatures as low as USDA Zone 3 while maintaining its architectural structure year-round. This resilience is a result of specific evolutionary traits. Their thick, fleshy leaves act as internal water reservoirs, and their specialized metabolism allows them to shut down moisture loss to survive extreme heat and prolonged drought. But those exact survival mechanics create a unique problem for the home gardener. Because sedums are biologically wired to thrive in harsh adversity, the traditional impulse to care for them is often exactly what kills them. This scorecard highlights the conflict. Traditional perennials usually demand rich, fertile soil, weekly watering, and occasional fertilizer. Apply those inputs to a sedum, and the roots will rot or the stems will collapse. They require poor soil, extended dry periods, and almost total neglect. Growing these plants successfully requires you to unlearn the standard habits of pampering your garden. Success here is measured by your ability to step away and stop managing the plant. Stepping away is the easy part. The hard part is deciding which one to plant.
the Sedum genus contains over 400 unique species, which often leads to total decision paralysis at the garden center. Most buyers make the mistake of picking up a pot based entirely on how the foliage looks in a photo, without investigating how that specific species actually grows. This matrix breaks the vast genus down into 3 functional categories: the tall, upright varieties, formerly known as Hyloteliphium, the low-growing creeping ground covers, and the specialty tropical houseplants. Each of these categories behaves differently. You will only get the maximum aesthetic yield out of a sedum if its specific growth habit matches the environment you place it in. Whether stabilizing a rocky slope, feeding late-season pollinators, or decorating a windowsill, your results depend on pulling the correct biological tool from these 3 options. Category 1 consists of upright sedums, like the popular Autumn Joy. These grow up to 2 feet tall and produce massive flat flower heads from late summer through fall, serving as a crucial late-season food source for pollinators. The most common error with uprights is planting them in heavy, moist, or heavily amended garden beds. When an upright sedum absorbs high levels of nitrogen and moisture from rich soil, it responds by pushing out rapid, lush foliage growth. Looking at this cross-section, rapid growth compromises structural integrity. Heavy blooms cause weak, elongated stems to buckle. To prevent this, use the Chelsea chop in late May. Cutting new stems in half forces compact branching, yielding a dense, rigid structure that holds seed heads upright. Upright sedums provide excellent architecture for a perennial border, provided you deliberately withhold nutrients and apply strategic, aggressive pruning. Category 2 is the creeping or mat-forming sedums, like Voodoo or John Creech. Instead of growing 2 feet tall, these rarely rise more than a few inches off the soil. To establish a creeping colony, you take small vegetative cuttings, space them exactly 12 inches apart, and press them into dry, gravelly earth. As the creeping stems spread horizontally, they will rapidly generate new root systems at the nodes wherever the plant physically touches the ground. This creates a tightly woven, living mulch that crowds out weeds and locks moisture into the soil. The primary trade-off is fragility. The brittle, fleshy leaves will crush instantly under human foot traffic. For anyone managing a steep, poor soil slope without an irrigation system, creeping sedums solve the erosion problem while requiring 0 ongoing maintenance once established. Category 3 brings us indoors to the specialty or tropical sedums like the trailing burrow's tail. These are utilized for their dramatic, cascading architectural displays. The unique vulnerability here is physical handling. The plump, overlapping leaves that make the plant so striking are barely attached to the main stem. Overly frequent watering, clumsy repotting attempts, or just brushing past the plant will cause these brittle leaves to snap off, exposing bare patches of stem and ruining the cascading lines. That physical fragility is paired with a biological hurdle. Houseplant collectors frequently note that their indoor trailing sedums rarely produce their showy terminal blooms. This temperature diagram reveals the missing requirement. To trigger flowering, you must move the plant into a cooler environment, dropping ambient temperatures to the 50 to 60 degree range during winter. This cold exposure initiates a dormancy response, the biological trigger for producing terminal flowers next summer. Achieving the maximum aesthetic yield for a tropical sedum means strictly manipulating its winter temperature while maintaining near-zero physical disturbance year-round. Selecting a sedum comes down to mapping your specific landscape constraints to the biological profile of the plant. This decision tree starts with your goal. Need late-season color and perennial borders? Follow the path to upright sedums. Suppressing weeds on rocky soil? Follow the path to creeping sedums. Want an indoor architectural display? Select a specialty variety like burrow's tail. Misaligning these goals is a guarantee of failure. Planting a creeping variety in rich border soil will rot it out, and putting a fragile burrow's tail outside in high traffic will destroy it. Horticultural success with this genus is entirely dependent on matching the correct biological tool to the exact environmental friction point. Sedums are for the ecological landscaper dealing with rocky soil, or the homeowner seeking high visual output with minimal manual input. They are not appropriate for gardeners working with heavy, poorly draining clay, or those who cannot resist the urge to constantly water and fertilize their garden beds. The central paradox of this plant family is that you have to completely unlearn the standard habits of pampering your garden. Match the habit to the landscape, plant in the porous soil,
and leave it completely alone. For sedum, deliberate inaction is the specific biological input required to maximize your landscaping ROI. Look at this photograph. This is the goal for most cottage gardens. A massive, flowing mound of lavender blue flowers that looks completely effortless and pulls in pollinators all season long. But out in the yard, that plan usually gets wrecked by local deer browsing your beds, or erratic rainfall wiping out your expensive plants, through the specific care routine that produces 6 months of purple blooms. Your choice at the nursery determines whether you plant an invasive headache or a self-sustaining landscape anchor. The confusion starts because both of these plants belong to the mint family, meaning they both have square stems and highly aromatic foliage. This matrix breaks down the differences. Let's look at catnip first, Nepeta cataria. It produces heavy oils and drops aggressive seeds, acting as a highly invasive lead banned in regional parks. It offers zero ornamental value, but brings cats rolling into your yard. Now, the second column, ornamental catmint, specifically sterile hybrids like Nepeta x fasani. Because it is sterile, it cannot produce viable seeds. It stays exactly where you put it, growing in neat, contained mounds rather than swallowing your garden pathways. And while your cat might sniff at it, it lacks the intense psychoactive punch of catnip. It functions purely as a premium ornamental plant. Those essential oils serve a powerful purpose. When a deer or rabbit brushes the hairy leaves, the released scent overwhelms their olfactory receptors, forcing them to find milder food. Purchasing a specifically sterile hybrid catmint eliminates the ecological nightmare of catnip while keeping the exact chemical defenses you need to protect your garden. Once you rule out catnip, catmint's true aesthetic rival is English lavender, the notoriously fragile staple of the cottage garden. Lavender has very strict demands. If you plant it in heavy, unamended clay soils or in regions with high humidity and erratic winter moisture, that heavy soil traps moisture against the plant, the crown rots, and the plant is dead before spring. Catmint acts as a direct structural substitute capable of handling those exact suboptimal conditions. During its first growing season, catmint establishes a deep, extensive taproot. Once that root system is anchored, it tolerates extreme dry spells and thrives in poor soil indefinitely. You do make a clear trade-off here. You lose the iconic fragrance of true lavender, and you cannot harvest it for culinary use. What you gain is a visually identical, cool-toned purple haze that actually survives freezing winters and reliably returns year after year. You are choosing to downgrade your culinary utility in exchange for a massive, stress-free upgrade in landscape reliability. Nurseries love to push the zero-maintenance myth, but catmint actually requires a strategy of active neglect to thrive. If you pamper this plant by giving it rich compost, fertilizer, and frequent watering, it grows entirely too fast. The stems become weak and leggy, eventually causing the center of the plant to split open and flop messily onto the ground. The correct approach is to withhold all fertilizer. Once the first-year roots are established, you rely strictly on natural rainfall. This timeline chart illustrates the single mandatory chore required. You get a peak first bloom in late spring, followed by a sharp drop-off in flower production. Right after that first spring bloom fades, take hedge clippers and brutally shear the plant back by a full 1/3. This physical damage shocks the plant. In response, it pushes out a massive secondary flush of blooms that lasts through late summer and into fall. It is not a zero-effort plant. You are trading daily coddling for one calculated 10-minute pruning session that guarantees 6 months of color. When integrating this into a bed, look at this schematic. Circle 9 is Walker's Low catmint. Notice its massive footprint in this 12x6 plot. At this scale, it's a foundational anchor, creating a physical block that protects the plants behind it. Planted on the edges, it creates a strong olfactory perimeter. Browsing deer smell the catmint and turn away, missing the vulnerable hostas located behind it. But that large footprint presents a specific problem. Catmint is a broad term, and the wrong cultivar will quickly swallow your garden pathways. Cultivars like Walker's Low and Six Hills Giant demand up to 4 feet of space. If you have tight borders, you need compact varieties specifically engineered for edging, like Cat's Pajamas or Junior Walker.
Matching the exact sterile cultivar to your spatial limits is the final step to ensuring you don't end up with an overgrown mess. Here is the final breakdown. Catmint gives you the romantic aesthetic of a cottage garden without the fragility, provided you let it be. Dealing with heavy deer pressure, with poor soil, and short on time, this is your optimal hands-off anchor plant. If you want to harvest culinary herbs for the kitchen, or you require rigid, formal topiary shapes, skip catmint entirely. And when you buy, check the plant tags carefully. Make sure you are purchasing a sterile Nepeta x Vicini hybrid, not a packet of invasive catnip seeds. Embracing catmint requires fighting your instinct to overcare. Leave it alone, prune it once, and you get half a year of guaranteed pollinator-friendly color. Modern urban centers face a severe infrastructure challenge: sudden, heavy rainfall, overwhelming standard drainage systems. To mitigate this, engineers are increasingly turning to the sponge city model, utilizing sunken green infrastructure to absorb and hold surface runoff. When cities lack the proper hydrological design, the resulting street flooding causes extensive property damage and paralyzes transportation networks. A common specification for these new green buffer zones is Echinacea purpurea, widely known as the purple coneflower. In conventional landscaping, it holds a pervasive reputation as a rugged, drought-resistant prairie plant. When landscape architects place this supposedly drought-proof species in the dry upper edges of urban buffer zones, it frequently underperforms. Yet, when those same basins experience severe inundation, completely submerging the roots, the plant unexpectedly survives. To understand why this plant operates backward from its reputation, we have to discard anecdotal gardening advice. We need to examine its empirical physiological response at the cellular level under absolute extremes. The line between decorative landscaping and engineered urban resilience relies entirely on cellular data rather than horticultural lore. A study published in the Journal of Biotech Research evaluated 12 common green infrastructure plants to determine their true utility in high-stress urban environments. The researchers employed a dual-stress methodology. They subjected the plants to 30 days of absolute drought and contrasted that with 30 days of complete root collar flooding. Rather than relying on visual observation of wilting or discoloration, the research focused entirely on biochemical markers, measuring the plant's reactive oxygen metabolism to gauge internal stress. Isolating Echinacea from the 12 studied species allows us to interrogate its exact physiological profile. Engineering a city's water cycle requires knowing exactly how a plant's cell membrane reacts when pushed to these absolute hydrological extremes. In the first phase of the protocol, the plants were placed in a controlled greenhouse and received zero irrigation for 30 days. The primary threat of severe drought is lipid peroxidation. Without water, the internal balance collapses, fracturing the cell membranes. This produces malondialdehyde, or MDA, the final product of cellular breakdown. It rapidly accumulates, serving as a direct indicator of toxicity. This table displays the malondialdehyde concentrations after the 30-day drought protocol. The data shows a highly significant spike in Echinacea's MDA levels, indicating severe toxicity. Compared to the other 11 species in the control group, Echinacea sustained heavy cellular damage, demonstrating a near-total lack of drought resilience. The cellular data proves Echinacea lacks the biological equipment to survive severe urban drought. The conventional landscaping classification of the plant as drought-proof is demonstrably false. The researchers then initiated the 30-day flooding protocol, keeping the root collars of the test subjects entirely submerged in water. Flooding creates a hypoxic environment, a severe lack of oxygen, that forces the plant to generate reactive oxygen species, or free radicals, which threaten to destroy the cell from the inside. To survive, a plant relies on superoxide dismutase, or SOD. This enzyme acts as the first line of defense, efficiently scavenging these free radicals and converting them into less harmful substances. This table tracks the SOD activity under flooding stress. Echinacea exhibited a massive, highly significant upregulation of SOD compared to its baseline. This proactive biochemical defense neutralizes the hypoxic threat, allowing the plant to maintain its cellular integrity over weeks of continuous inundation. Echinacea fails in the dry prairie, but thrives in the deluge.
Its cellular chemistry proves it is a highly specialized, flood-tolerant biomaterial. To translate this biochemical data into engineering guidelines, researchers used an affiliation function, a mathematical model ranking species by their composite stress tolerance. While true dual survivors like Mentha canadensis ranked first in both categories, Echinacea showed a severe split. It ranked 5th overall in flood tolerance, but dropped to 10th out of 12 in drought tolerance. We apply this mathematical ranking directly to urban rain gardens. Engineers must remove Echinacea from the dry upper edges, as it fails during low rainfall. Instead, it belongs exclusively in the sunken basins, where its flood defense mechanisms activate during storms. Resilient green infrastructure requires abandoning anecdotal horticulture and plotting species according to their empirical affiliation function. Surviving an urban flood is only the baseline requirement for these installations. Once established, the plant must generate ecological yield for the surrounding environment. A common specification failure in city planning is the deployment of modern commercial hybrids, which are bred heavily for unique colors and aesthetic uniformity. By prioritizing visual traits, breeders often eliminate the plant's functional biology. Many of these hybrids lack viable seed or nectar, rendering them useless to the local insect community. To ensure pollinator support, landscape architects must specify the straight species, or the wild-type Echinacea purpurea. During the summer phase, the wild type provides dense nectar resources for long-tongued bees, acting as an essential host plant for silvery checkerspot butterfly larvae. A biomaterial that survives the flood but starves the local ecosystem serves no practical purpose in urban design. The utility of the plant extends beyond the summer bloom and into the harsh winter phase of the urban landscape. Standard landscaping practice often dictates deadheading, pruning the spent, blackened stalks in the fall to maintain a tidy appearance. Deadheading actively destroys the plant's secondary biological function, providing a critical above-snowpack food source. During the winter seed bank phase, when ground-level forage is obscured by deep snow, birds like American goldfinches rely heavily on the seeds held high in these elevated cones. The thick, dead stalks also provide necessary winter refuge for beneficial insects, protecting them until they emerge to pollinate the city in the spring. High-performance urban infrastructure succeeds by aligning a species' true biochemical stress limits with its complete dual-season ecological life cycle.
If you're staring at your Russian sage right now, you're probably looking at a messy, brittle pile of gray twigs. Don't dig it up and stop trying to baby it. It's time for some tough love. To reset this plant, you only need 4 things: an established Russian sage, bypass pruners, heavy-duty loppers, and rubbing alcohol. We are going to give it what looks like a destructive haircut, but it is the exact step required to turn that dead-looking pile into a tight, compact bush covered in blooms. This drastic annual reset is a strict biological requirement. Without structural renewal, Russian sage produces weak, hollow stems that flop over onto the ground. Throw out your calendar. The right time to prune depends entirely on your local soil temperatures. A reliable natural cue is the daffodil rule. Wait to prune until your local daffodils are about 4 to 6 inches tall. Look at the soil line for exactly 1 to 2 inches of glossy, vibrant green new shoots emerging from those heavily weathered, silvery gray stems. Do not make the mistake of pruning in autumn or late winter. Those old, dead-looking stems act as a physical shield, insulating the living crown below from freeze-thaw cycles that will rot the roots. Before you make a single cut, take that 70% isopropyl alcohol and thoroughly wipe down the blades of your bypass pruners and loppers. Leave your head shears and anvil pruners in the shed. These tools crush stems rather than slicing them, creating ragged, open wounds where diseases can enter. By pairing a clean, sharp blade with the exact moment the plant wakes up, you protect the vulnerable crown and minimize stress during its most sensitive transition period. Your target is this specific safety zone, exactly 6 to 12 inches above the soil line. That's where you cut. Cutting flush to the ground destroys the lowest 4 to 6 inches, eliminating the plant's emergency reserves of dormant buds. If you're unsure whether a stem is truly dead, try the thumbnail test. Scratch the upper bark with your nail. If you reveal hollow wood with no green layer underneath, it has to go. Russian sage blooms exclusively on current season new wood. That means all those old, tall stems from last year are useless for producing flowers. Once you finish your cuts, immediately gather every single piece of that old wood and put it into yard waste bags. Do not toss these stems into your compost pile. Hollow, decaying sagewood is a perfect hiding spot for overwintering spider mites and fungal spores. Leaving those stubs perfectly preserves the survival reserves of the crown, while ruthlessly eliminating the dead weight that physically blocks new blooms. Now, step away from the plant. Do not apply fertilizer, do not add compost, or give it extra water.
Take a look at this photograph. This is the extreme, arid, high-elevation rocky steppe of Central Asia, exactly where Russian sage evolved to survive. In this image, you see the cracked, dry earth it calls home. The root system expects poor, fast-draining, rocky conditions, not pampered garden loam. If you overfeed this plant, the excess nitrogen forces it to pump out soft, sappy stems instead of building rigid, sturdy wood. The moment heavy blooms appear later in the summer, those soft stems will collapse under the weight and splay open from the center. Enforcing strict neglect replicates the harsh conditions of its native geography, forcing the plant to build the stiff, self-supporting architecture required to hold up a spectacular display. Your plant is going to look stark and maybe a little ruined sitting there as a cluster of 8-inch stubs. That is completely normal. Give it 10 to 14 days. In that window, vigorous new shoots will break dormancy and push through the soil. From there, the plant enters an explosive growth phase. Those woody stubs rapidly push out dense, silver-green shoots that transition directly into a massive cloud of vibrant purple flowers. Following this hard reset guarantees you will get a massive, architectural display of lavender-blue flowers all summer long, without any of the messy flopping. Since Russian sage thrives in the absolute worst, rockiest soils in your yard, you can leverage that resilience. Now that you know how to care for it, you can start propagating new, free plants to fill in all those difficult, empty spaces in your garden. When we want a system to thrive, a garden, a business, or a creative project, our first instinct is to flood it with resources. We provide rich topsoil, precise metrics, and standard tools, assuming that optimal conditions yield the best results. Look at the Russian sage. It produces a gorgeous, misty cloud of lavender-blue flowers that catch the sunlight for months on end. Or look at the couture of designer Tony Matasevsky. His avant-garde gowns are heavily sculpted, striking forms that dominate international runways. But if you plant Russian sage in rich, expensive, fertilized soil, it doesn't thrive. The plant grows weak, its stems become physically floppy, and it completely loses that elegant, upright mist. Similarly, if Matasevsky were to rely on the standard resources of classical fashion, traditional measuring tapes, basic flat patterns, and industry-standard blocks, his designs would lose their breathtaking tension. These highly refined systems actively reject optimal resources. To understand how they forge such awe-inspiring structure, we have to look at how they use deprivation and neglect as building blocks. Biologists have a term for organisms adapted to scarcity: oligotrophs. These are species that evolve to survive in environments offering almost zero nutrients. You find them in extreme isolation, like the barren, frozen landscape of Antarctica's Lake Vostok, where life clings to the ice in sub-zero temperatures. You also find them in the nutrient-depleted, highly acidic white sands of Amazonian blackwater rivers. Because these organisms spent millennia adapting to scarcity, introducing sudden, abundant nutrients overwhelms their delicate metabolic systems. Their enzymes function perfectly in a deficit, but struggle to regulate uptake when flooded with resources. In a garden, high-fertility soil triggers a secondary threat. Rich dirt is perfect for aggressive grasses, whose roots rapidly multiply and choke out slower-growing wildflowers. But in poor soil, those grasses starve. Without competition, a resilient wildflower establishes a deep taproot and dominates the landscape. For an oligotroph, the heavily fertilized, perfectly tended garden is a systemic death sentence. The Russian sage goes a step further. It uses poor soil as a literal structural mechanism. A strict lack of nutrients forces the plant cells to grow incredibly slowly. This slow, steady division produces rigid, highly dense stems.
That tough physical tension allows the plant to hold its delicate, cloud-like lavender canopy perfectly upright, even through intense heat and drought. When a gardener applies rich fertilizer, the plant is forced to consume it and grow far too quickly. Its cells rapidly expand, becoming bloated and structurally porous. Without that dense internal architecture, the stems become weak and floppy, buckling in half under their own weight. The Russian sage requires the physical tension of a harsh, neglected environment to maintain its architectural integrity. Designer Tony Matisevsky operates as a creative oligotroph. He intentionally starves his own process, rejecting the abundant resources of conventional haute couture. Early in his career, he turned down prestigious, resource-heavy jobs from established houses. When he built his own brand, he abandoned traditional flat patterns and standard industry blocks. He even refuses to measure bespoke clients with numbers. Instead, he gauges scale and shape purely by sight, pinching and draping fabric intuitively directly onto a mannequin. Operating without standard data forces him to build complex physical tension into the garments themselves. He balances what is concealed and what is extended, engineering the drape through sheer restriction. This yields incredible structural manipulation. He can take a notoriously difficult, heavy material like neoprene and sculpt it so precisely that the fabric bounces and rolls like an ocean wave down the runway. That intense engineering transfers directly to the wearer. The clothes act as an armory for the ego, snapping the spine straight and creating a tall, regal silhouette. By operating in a self-imposed void, Matisevsky achieves gravity-defying forms. He proves that true structural art requires the deliberate rejection of standard inputs. Modern culture operates on the assumption that every aspect of our work and lives must be optimized, measured, and heavily resourced. But giving a project too many tools, a surplus of data, or overly perfect conditions often destroys its organic integrity. You end up with weak, floppy results that collapse under the weight of their own abundance. Scarcity, poor soil, and a lack of traditional tools are not deficits that need to be fixed. These restrictions provide the exact environmental friction required to forge deep resilience, drive innovation, and build extraordinary structure. Whether you are cultivating an ecosystem, running a design studio, or managing your own life, creating something truly elegant requires a step back. Stop babying the system. Embrace a little neglect and let the tension do the work.